The first burst struck the gravel 20 yards ahead of the lead Marine and cut a dark line across the extraction route marked safe on the command display. Across Kestrel Run, 87 Marines were leaving cover in staggered files, moving through an enemy-controlled observation belt beneath two limestone ridges. HM1 Mara Ellison held pressure on a rifleman's shoulder and watched dust rise from a western ledge that the live drone feed still showed empty. "Stop the movement." No one at the command table answered her. Lieutenant Colonel Grant Mercer leaned over the tactical display as blue icons advanced toward the southern crossing. The helicopter window would close in 26 minutes. The river was rising, and the unit could not remain exposed on the far bank after dark. His operations officer called the first burst in isolated contact and ordered the lead squad to maintain spacing. Mara secured the dressing, marked the treatment time, and walked toward the screen with blood drying across her gloves. "The western shelf is occupied," she said. "Your picture hasn't caught up." A captain looked at the medical pouch on her vest before looking at her face. "Doc, we need casualty status, not terrain interpretation." Two Marines beside the radio stack exchanged tired smiles. One muttered that corpsmen did not clear kill zones. Mercer heard him. "Your job is to stop bleeding, document, not stop movements." The words landed cleanly because they sounded reasonable. Mara was a Navy corpsman assigned to the Marine unit, not a drone technician or intelligence officer. The command team had a certified surveillance platform, a mapped extraction corridor, and less than half an hour before weather closed the air route. Mara did not argue. She looked through the open tent flap. A flash appeared inside a split in the western cliff. The rifle report crossed the 312-meter sight line, struck the canyon wall, and returned as a distorted echo. That could explain why the sound felt wrong. It could not explain why the dust plume remained absent from the monitor. Then the image updated. The plume appeared on screen after the enemy position had already gone dark. Mara touched the bezel of her field watch. The first difference might have been canyon distortion. One observation was not evidence. A second burst struck the drainage wall beside the moving Marines. Mara saw the impact directly, counted against the second hand, and waited. The command display still showed an undisturbed strip of ground. 1 second, 2, 3, 4. The impact finally appeared. Mara's expression did not change. That was the detail the radio operator noticed. She had not guessed. She had been testing. 4.7, she said. Mercer ordered the eastern squad forward another 63 meters. Mara returned to the wounded rifleman, checked his pulse, and looked again toward the far bank. Loose shale began sliding down a 21-degree slope above the Marines. Nothing appeared on the drone. The system was not showing the battlefield. It was showing what the battlefield had been 4.7 seconds earlier. Mara waited for a third event before touching the command equipment. Kestrel Run moved at 11 knots through the center channel, but along the northern rock shelf, a reverse eddy folded back at approximately 2.6 knots. Reeds bent downstream, foam curved upstream, and 14-knot wind pushed pale dust off the western ridge. 312 meters away, another muzzle flash opened above the stranded unit. Mara pressed the watch bezel. The sound arrived after the canyon folded it twice. The drone image updated 4.7 seconds later. The interval had not changed. She stepped beside the radio operator and pointed to the two clocks on his console. Sensor time and display time. He hesitated, then opened the diagnostic pane. The command overlay showed one timestamp. The aircraft's raw acquisition stream used another, but the second record was stored on the drone's removable onboard module rather than the local console. "The aircraft keeps the original?" Mara asked. "Until the module is pulled," he said. "The command cache only keeps the rendered feed. Preserve it." Mercer looked up from the map. After the mission, Mara placed a blood-marked finger beside the mission recorder and waited for the next impact. Dust rose near a boulder on the far bank. The local ground camera caught it immediately. The tactical display remained clean before updating exactly 4.7 seconds later. "Fixed latency," she said. "Not echo." The tent smelled of hot circuitry river mud, and gun oil. Broken radio traffic snapped through the speakers as the Farbank unit reported movement along the western shelf. Mercer turned to the systems officer. Could relay compression produce this? The officer studied the diagnostics. Before deployment, the system had shown a variable delay between 1.1 and 1.5 seconds during heavy network load. It had been judged manageable because the extraction window was narrow and the alternate ground route had already been cut off by rising water. Mercer was not ignoring an obvious failure for no reason. He was choosing between two bad options. But 4.7 seconds was not the approved delay. Mara pointed toward a flock of gray birds rising from the southern ravine. They moved before the drone showed any activity there. The birds are reacting to the present, she said. The feed is not. The operations captain folded his arms. You're comparing wildlife to a certified system. I'm comparing two clocks. Mercer ordered the Eastern Squad to advance another 63 meters before the helicopter window collapsed. On the far bank, Marines moved exactly as trained, using cover and spacing according to the route on their screens. Mara saw loose shale slide upward against its natural fall. Someone had stepped behind the ridge. Uppercut, 21 degrees. Mercer covered the transmit switch with his hand. No unauthorized calls. A burst of fire struck the route seconds later. Two Marines disappeared behind a boulder too narrow to protect both of them. Mara returned to the casualty mat and removed a small waterproof notebook from her vest. The corners had softened from use. Daniel Voss's block handwriting remained visible across the first page. When the screen and the ground disagree, believe the ground. Daniel had died after a location warning was dismissed during an earlier mission. Mara did not let the memory make the decision for her. She used it to force herself to verify again. On a blank page, she wrote, 87 alive at contact. 4.7-second fixed delay. 312 meter sight line. Western shelf active. She did not record enemy numbers. Her ledger counted only the people who might still return. The Eastern Squad moved exactly as ordered. Two Marines crossed the first 63 meters in disciplined bounds while the rest held their sectors. Their spacing was correct. Their cover transitions were correct. Their weapons remained oriented toward the threat icon marked on the drone display. The enemy had already left that position. A hostile team had shifted 287 meters south along a broken limestone seam, while command was still watching its previous location. The Marines were not failing because they lacked training. They were executing perfect movements against a battlefield that no longer existed. Mara heard the next ambush forming before the first shot. Loose stones scraped beneath a boot. A radio clicked open for less than a second without a voice. 14-knot wind carried the metallic smell of spent ammunition from the south ridge. Upper seam, she said. The first burst struck the drainage wall behind the lead pair. The operations captain redirected support fire toward the threat marker on the screen. The Marines fired accurately into the western shelf. Every round hit a position the enemy had abandoned 4.7 seconds earlier. A second hostile team opened from the south. Broken radio calls filled the command tent. Red 2 pinned, static swallowed the rest. Casualty at marker. The transmission collapsed beneath another burst. Mercer ordered the northern fire team forward to reinforce the drainage line. On the display, the movement made sense. In real terrain, it compressed 3 squads into overlapping fire. Mara returned to the wounded rifleman and opened the dressing. Pale stone fragments were embedded inside the wound channel. She removed one with forceps and placed it on a steel tray. The eastern ridge was dark volcanic rock. The fragment was chalk-white limestone. She measured the wound path against the Marine's position. The round had entered from approximately 31 degrees above and west. A second casualty arrived with torn fabric and dust driven into the left side of his plate carrier. The angle matched the first. Mara wrote both directions on the backs of the casualty tags and laid them beside the tactical map. Compare them. The radio operator looked from the wound diagrams to the screen. They don't match the eastern marker. Mercer examined the evidence. For the first time, hesitation appeared in his face. The helicopter window had fallen below 19 minutes. If he stopped the movement and the aircraft could not reach the far bank, 87 Marines would remain inside enemy observation range while the river rose behind them. He ordered the systems officer to run a quick latency check. The diagnostic returned unstable network conditions but did not identify the full 4.7-second fault because the command console was reading the rendered feed, not the raw onboard clock. Mercer chose to continue. It was a defensible tactical decision for another 30 seconds. Then the far bank unit reported 6 wounded, 1 critical, and ammunition at 40%. Mara opened Daniel's notebook. 87 alive at contact, 6 wounded, 1 critical, all still recoverable. She did not write how many enemy firing points she had identified. Those numbers belonged to another kind of report. Mercer raised the handset. All elements continue toward extraction. Mara looked at the casualty angles, the birds above the ravine, and the green corridor leading between 2 ridges. The enemy had not merely found the route. They had prepared it. The next order would place all 87 Marines inside the same kill zone. At 14:26, Mercer canceled the North Bank crossing and ordered every supporting element to withdraw 731 meters from Kestrel Run. North elements disengage. South element hold position until further tasking. The order protected the command post from being drawn into the ambush. It also left 87 Marines trapped beyond the river. The far bank response arrived through broken static. Red 2 has 6 wounded, 1 critical, MO, the signal vanished. Mara looked at the map. The Southern Marines were compressed between the limestone seam and a drainage channel 38 centimeters deep. The helicopter window would close in 19 minutes. The critical casualty had already been without full circulation below the knee for 23 minutes. Mercer called the withdrawal force preservation. No one asked which force it preserved. Mara rotated the map 90 degrees. From that angle, the drainage line appeared to bend behind the southern shelf. The overhead drone flattened it into open terrain, but a direct ground signal from the far bank could establish both timing and elevation. She looked toward the equipment rack. A palm-sized analog beacon sat beneath a coil of medical marking tape. It operated outside the drone network and produced a visible white pulse strong enough to be seen from both banks. "Give me the beacon." The operations captain stared at her. "For what?" "1 pulse here, 1 there. Compare both to the raw clock." Mercer stepped between her and the rack. "You want to cross 146 meters of water inside an enemy-controlled observation belt to test a timing discrepancy, to establish ground truth. The center channel is moving at 11 knots. The northern eddy is 2.6. You're not trained to conduct a solo penetration. I'm trained to reach casualties." Mercer's jaw tightened. His decision was no longer simple arrogance. If Mara crossed and failed, he would lose a corpsman and reveal another route. If he allowed her to go, he would be admitting that the certified system directing the operation could not be trusted. Denied. Another distress call reached the tent. The critical patient's pulse had dropped to 56. 2 more Marines were unable to walk without assistance. Mara opened Daniel's notebook and updated the ledger. 87 alive at contact, 6 wounded, 1 critical, 87 still recoverable. She packed clotting gauze, tourniquets, airway seals, intravenous tubing, orange marking tape, and the beacon. She left the extra ammunition behind. Mercer removed the radio from her shoulder. "You are relieved of field authority. Remain at the aid station." Mara tightened the straps on her medical bag. Her pulse had climbed to 74. Sweat cooled beneath her armor. She felt the fear clearly. She simply did not allow it to issue orders. The young Marine who had laughed earlier stood in the tent opening. Mara handed him the casualty list. He read the names, looked across the river, and stepped aside. "Corpsman," Mercer said. "Stand down." Mara lifted the beacon. "Negative. Your clock is wrong. I'm correcting it." She entered Kestrel Run 29 meters downstream from the marked crossing. The center current moved at 11 knots, but the reverse eddy beneath the northern rock shelf slowed to 2.6. She clipped into the line and let the water carry her along the protected curve. A round struck 5 meters upstream. The line snapped tight and drove the carabiner into her left shoulder. Pain shot down her arm. One side pouch tore free and disappeared into the river. Mara kept moving. She had not crossed yet, and the plan had already cost her equipment and the full strength of one arm. Mara reached the southern bank after 146 meters of water and loose stone. A Marine pulled her behind a boulder. Her left hand had begun to numb, and the shoulder strap of her medical bag cut across the point where the carabiner had struck. The missing pouch had carried her backup chest seal kit and one set of airway equipment. "Doc, who sent you?" "No one." She moved directly to the casualties. 6 Marines lay inside the drainage channel. One had arterial bleeding below the knee. Another showed signs of a collapsed lung. Mara used her remaining commercial seal on the chest wound and converted the sterile inner wrapper from an intravenous pack into a backup occlusive dressing. She treated the critical casualty, recorded his pulse at 53, and opened Daniel's notebook. 87 alive at contact. 6 wounded. 1 critical. All still recoverable. The drainage line looked flat on the map, but from ground level, its northern wall rose at 17 degrees before bending behind a limestone rib. Dust moved through scrub 41 meters south and disappeared. The channel continued beyond the drone's view. Mara placed the analog beacon on a pale stone slab and activated it. The pulse was visible immediately from the North Bank ground camera. It appeared on the tactical display 4.7 seconds later. The difference was no longer an argument. It was measurable from both banks. Mara watched the hostile firing rhythm. The Western team fired for approximately 3.1 seconds, shifted, and left a 6.2-second gap before the Southern team could cover the same corridor. She initially planned to move 2 3-man teams during each gap. The first 6 Marines entered 2 parallel sections of the drainage cut. A litter frame caught against an 84-centimeter choke point, slowing one team by 1.4 seconds. The next burst struck the wall and drove limestone fragments into a Marine's calf. Mara reached him, stopped the bleeding, and changed the model. The mistake was hers. 6 people per lane was too much when a litter was involved. She divided the route into 3 movement cells. The 2 walking lanes could pass 3 Marines each. The litter lane could pass only 2. 8 people could move during a full 6.2-second gap, but only if each cell operated independently. 3 left, 3 center, 2 litter, she told the platoon sergeant. If one lane stops, the others keep moving. She marked each turn with orange medical tape and placed Marines with working radios along the route. The system no longer depended on the delayed command feed. Each cell moved on visible muzzle dust and the silence between firing teams. After the initial 6, 4 full intervals moved 32 more. 38 Marines were now beyond the primary kill zone. A shortened 5th gap allowed only 7 through. 45. 3 more full intervals moved 24. 69. The enemy shifted early on the next cycle. Mara halted the center lane and sent only 5 through the protected left cut. 74. The remaining 13 included the 6 wounded for security Marines, the platoon sergeant, Mara, and 1 radio operator. The model changed with each real observation. Mara did not force the terrain to obey her first calculation. She forced the calculation to obey the terrain. The final 13 Marines could not move in one group. The hostile teams had shortened their rotation, reducing the safe interval from 6.2 seconds to 4.8. Wind pushed 13 knots through the ravine, filling the channel with chalk dust and the bitter smell of burned propellant. Mara's left shoulder had stiffened. Her grip weakened each time she lifted the medical bag. She divided the final movement into 3 groups. The first contained 3 walking wounded and 2 security Marines. They cleared the 26-meter exposed section in 4.3 seconds. 79 Marines beyond the kill zone. The second group carried the critical casualty with 1 security Marine and the radio operator. The litter frame scraped the stone choke point, but the team had rehearsed the turn. They crossed before the southern gun recovered. 83. For remained Mara, the platoon sergeant, and 2 Marines covering the withdrawal. Mercer's voice broke through the local handset. Hold position. Revised coordinates incoming. The platoon sergeant looked toward Mara. She opened Daniel's notebook. 83 recovered. From moving. We finished the count. The 2 covering Marines crossed first. The platoon sergeant followed after the western gun fell silent. Mara remained behind to retrieve the beacon and remove the orange tape nearest the river. Leaving the markers would expose the hidden route to the enemy. The sergeant told her to abandon the equipment. Mara handed him the notebook. Keep the names moving. She returned through the 17-degree descent alone. The metal beacon fell cold in her right hand. Above her, boots moved across loose shale. The enemy team was shifting to regain sight of the drainage exit. Mara triggered one final pulse on the exposed slab, then moved beneath the scrub. Rifle fire shattered the beacon 1.8 seconds later. Fragments struck the rock with a metallic ring. One piece cut through the side of her sleeve, but the round had followed the light instead of her movement. She reached the protected shelf. 87 Marines were accounted for. 6 required evacuation. 1 remained critical. Every pulse was present. The helicopter arrived with less than 4 minutes left in the weather window. Mara transferred treatment times, circulation notes, and airway status to the flight corpsman. She did not describe the crossing or the ambush. Only after the final casualty lifted away did she reopen the notebook. 87 alive at contact. 87 recovered. She drew one line beneath the last entry. Mercer had prepared the consequences on the north bank. 2 security Marines waited beside the aid station. Mara's radio was already gone. Her sidearm was cleared, her medical authority suspended, and her identification card sealed pending investigation. Mercer accused her of abandoning her assigned station, disobeying a direct order, transmitting on an unauthorized device, and compromising operational control. The young Marine who had laughed inside the tent stepped forward. Mara stopped him with a small movement of her hand. They still need you. As security led her away, Mercer ordered the local command cache cleared under operational security protocol. The radio operator looked toward the drone landing zone. The rendered cache could be erased. The raw acquisition module was still inside the aircraft. The inquiry began 6 hours later. Mara sat at a cold metal table with her credentials sealed inside a clear evidence pouch. Dust remained in the seams of her uniform. Her left shoulder had been wrapped, and the room smelled of burned coffee, gun oil, and overheated electronics. Mercer presented a coherent account. A corpsman affected by an earlier battlefield loss had abandoned her station, entered an enemy-controlled area without authorization, and disrupted a withdrawal plan built around a closing helicopter window. The unit survived, he argued, because Marine fire teams adapted and the enemy repositioned. He did not describe Mara as incompetent. He described her as correct for the wrong reasons. That version was more dangerous. The first review officer focused on the disobedience charge. Mara had crossed after a direct denial. She had used an unapproved beacon. She had redirected movement without command authority. Mara placed the casualty tags on the table. The first layer of evidence was physical. 2 wound channels entered from approximately 31 degrees above and west. Pale limestone fragments had been removed from both casualties. The command map had placed the active threat on the eastern volcanic ridge. The map and the wounds could not both be correct. The operations captain admitted that the support element had fired on the eastern marker and found no target there. The disobedience charge remained, but Mercer's claim that Mara had misread the threat began to weaken. The second layer came from the analog beacon. A North Bank ground camera had recorded Mara's first pulse at 14 hours, 28 minutes, and 52 seconds. The tactical display showed the same pulse at 14 hours, 28 minutes, and 56.7 seconds. A 4.7-second difference. Mercer argued that the ground camera and drone used different clocks. The systems specialist placed the drone's removable acquisition module into the recovery terminal. The module had been mentioned before the crossing and preserved automatically when the aircraft landed. Clearing the command cache had not altered it. The raw sensor record showed each event twice, when the drone captured it and when the rendered feed displayed it. The gravel impact. The limestone movement 287 meters south. The analog beacon. Every event carried the same fixed 4.7-second separation. The third layer, established knowledge. 11 hours before deployment, the drone had failed 2 synchronization tests. The expected network delay was between 1.1 and 1.5 seconds. The actual fault had exceeded 4 seconds under full relay load. Mercer's account had authorized continued use because the helicopter window was narrow and the alternative route had closed. That decision alone was not criminal. The concealment came later. The command net recording played Mara's first warning, her second verification, and Mercer's order preventing an independent ground check. His after-action report claimed no measurable latency had been reported before the crossing. The audio proved otherwise. Mara turned the screen toward him. On one side sat the rendered battlefield. On the other sat the raw sensor time and his acknowledgement. "This is what they saw," she said. She pointed to the override. "This is what you knew." No general entered the room. No one shouted. Mercer's operational authority was suspended because the evidence reversed the inquiry one charge at a time. Mara's unauthorized crossing remained a documented breach, but the reviewing officer ruled it had occurred in response to an immediate threat created by concealed system failure. Her credentials were restored. Before reading the decision, Mara opened Daniel's notebook and checked the final line. 87 returned. 3 months after Kestrel Run, Mara stood inside a battalion training room with Daniel's waterproof notebook beside a revised field manual. Mercer's case had moved into formal proceedings. Mara did not attend. She had already given her testimony, and she had no interest in watching another officer lose his career. The command offered her a commendation and a transfer to a classified analysis section. She accepted the commendation only after the citation was rewritten. The first version described individual courage under fire. Mara asked that it recognize the casualty team, the Marines who maintained the movement cells, and the radio operator who preserved the raw acquisition module. She declined the transfer. She did not want to become a hidden expert called only after a system had already failed. Instead, she accepted a temporary assignment to build a battalion-level pilot program called the Ground Truth Protocol. The new process required every tactical feed to be compared with an independent field reference before it directed movement. A visible flash, local radio tone, or mechanical marker could establish the difference between sensor time and display time. Any delay above 1.3 seconds required recalibration or written approval from 2 officers. The more important rule involved people. Any corpsman, mechanic, radio operator, analyst, or junior Marine could request one immediate verification pause after identifying a measurable inconsistency. The request could not be dismissed solely because of rank or specialty. Mara insisted on that sentence. Skill did not protect anyone if the system allowed authority to silence evidence. On the first morning of the pilot course, 32 Marines entered expecting a lecture about drones. Mara gave them a delayed video feed, 3 casualty tags, a 2-dimensional map, and a tray of pale limestone fragments. Which source is lying? The young Marine who had once laughed beside the radio stack sat in the front row. He compared the wound angles with the thread icons and raised his hand. "The picture is late." Mara nodded. "Prove it." The room became quiet as the class measured timestamps, wind direction, terrain gradients, and transmission gaps. No one treated the medical evidence as secondary. No one told the radio operator to stay in his lane. Near the end of the exercise, a junior communications corporal noticed a 0.9 second mismatch between the field marker and the display. It was below the mandatory stop threshold, but the delay was increasing with every relay cycle. He looked toward the senior officer observing the class. Request ground truth check. 3 months earlier, a warning from someone of his rank might have been brushed aside. This time, the officer answered immediately. Approved. Freeze the movement. The room stopped. Technicians checked the relay. The corporal was correct. A timing fault had begun developing before the simulated unit entered the route. Mara did not smile or accept congratulations. She opened Daniel's notebook and wrote one new line beneath the Kestrel Run ledger. The warning was heard. Outside the classroom, another group waited to begin the course. Mara turned back toward the map as the door opened. The new class entered, and this time the system had already learned to listen. If you respect the silent courage of these undercover heroes, please hit the like button and subscribe. This story is a fictional military narrative created for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real events is purely coincidental.